But I'm going to move on to the Valley of Valley of Oaxaca and the Zapotec. So now here's where the Olmec were. We're gonna move over here to the Valley of Oaxaca and the Zapotec. So one of the first important sites that emerges in the Valley of Oaxaca is San Jose Mogote, and that is right here. Is the chief site from about 3500 to 2500 BP. The end of this particular reign of power looks like there was quite a bit of conflict because of it. We see defensive works and we find a lot of burned buildings. It does look like competition was between a settlement in Valle Grande and Tlacolula, which are the names of the arms here. So Tlacolula and then Valle Grande here. This was probably a chiefdom. That individual directed labor, because we do find some monumental architecture here. Was probably also responsible for collecting and redistributing agricultural surplus. Men have one of two burial styles, and it's kind of in a style of Olmec pottery, which has been interpreted as evidence of moieties, which we've already talked about. We have were-jaguar pottery and fire serpent pottery, and a person is buried with one or the other, but never the two together. And it does appear that the two groups did start to kind of come into conflict with one another. We do see evidence of occupational specialization here, again in the form of pottery. We see evidence of stratification in house construction, so some are made better than others. So we have adobe, which are the nicely made ones, and then we have wattle and daub, which is basically like sticks and mud. So quite a bit of difference there in housing construction. So, but again, it does seem like there's a lot of conflict, and then around 2500 BP, it seems like the Cloud people at San Jose Mogote kind of came out victorious and established this new community in an area that had never been settled before, but strategically speaking, it was ideal. So the site of Monte Alban in the central valley. So this is at the top of it, and you can see the entire valley. So it's highly defendable. You'd be able to see who's coming from miles and miles around. So it's easily defended. This is the first state-level society in Mesoamerica. So by 2200 BP, it was a state. It went from 0 to 17,000 people in a period of 300 years. So that's really big, or a pretty significant population increase, and it was 41,000 in the entire valley. 518 settlements have been identified, and it does appear to have been a bloody unification as the population swings up, and then it goes down 20% before the unification. We see some interesting things that might have been put into place to help control this population. One is the danzantes, or the dancers, which are these figures here, which were first interpreted as people dancing, but later, as we learned more about societies, we know that being naked in Mesoamerica is considered to be not a good thing, and only people of low status would ever appear naked in public. We believe that some of the figures look like they've actually been tortured or mutilated in some way. So people have thought that this is meant to intimidate and show the power of the ruler. The same with the zampantli, or the skull racks. This is actually from an Aztec one, but you can see it's just exactly what it sounds like, a skull rack. Sometimes these are carved out of stone, sometimes they're real skulls. Another way to show power and intimidate people. So imagine you're walking up to this huge site, and you've got these mutilated figures on one side and a skull rack on the other side. It might be a little bit scary. We see an administrative hierarchy appear during this time frame. So elite residences are clustered near Monte Alban. Administrative centers are kind of farther away. And they would actually have some political authority on their own. Like at this particular site right here, Dainzu, they have their own ball court. So that's usually an indication of some kind of authority. But then we would have craft centers out around there and agricultural production centers. So everything would get filtered up to these kind of secondary sites and then be funneled up to Monte Alban. We have craft specialization. We have comales for the first time, and these are what are used even today to make tortillas. So it's possible that we're seeing the emergence of that particular thing in Monte Alban. We see ceramics, so we've got some interesting kind of statuary here and some bowls here, the bat bowl. It's kind of a unique, interesting thing. We find jade working. We find unique burial items here. And we can see this is actually a real human skull, and it's got inlaid shells and some turquoise and so forth. So some people have suggested that we've got an ancestor worship going on here. Many tombs are found beneath the patios of elite residences. To the big tombs, there are private stairways, so there's limited access to these tombs. So again, it does seem like we've got something special going on here, and it might be ancestor worship. We see a Teotihuacan influence here, and we're going to talk about Teotihuacan here in a second. But this comes particularly in the architecture, which is called the talud tablero, which is slope and panel. So here's kind of a drawing of the talud tablero at Teotihuacan, and then we can see that in some of the architecture here at Monte Alban. We have crude hieroglyphs. They're really poorly understood, but we find them on sculpture, funerary urns, and murals, and as far as we can tell, there's no long count here. Now, the collapse of the state starts around 1700 BP. Well, actually, 1700 BP, it's relatively calm time. Then around 1250 BP, we start to see the decline. So we see pottery diversification begin around 1600 BP in the hinterlands, and it starts moving in closer and closer and closer to Monte Alban. So it looks like Monte Alban doesn't have the necessary power to keep people in line anymore. By 1200 BP, Monte Alban is totally abandoned, and we see kind of a warrior class emerge. Then they take power, and in particularly in Jaliza, we see this warrior class become really important.